broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
There's a lot of detail in the announcement, so I won't go over all the things that she's done. But most recently, she was founder and president of the Jewish Genealogy Society of Maryland. She leads the Jewish Gen Subcarpathian Sea. She's on the Ukraine State's Board of Directors, and she runs a number of town-focused projects. So her interests are very broad and deep, not just DNA, as she likes to tell me, but I heard Lara talk on DNA at the IHAGS conference in Warsaw, and realized that she made it, although it's complicated, she made it clear enough to me what to do with these 6,000 or 4,000 or however many thousands of cousins my family tree DNA keeps telling me I have. What I can do with them, what I can't do with them, and what you need to know if you're going to use DNA to investigate your family history. So, Lara?
All right, hello everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, especially since it's going to snow tomorrow in Maryland, so this is beautiful. How many people here have taken a DNA test already? All right, only about half. All right, so I'm going to talk about what you can expect to see for those of you who haven't taken a test, and what you probably are seeing for those of you who have, and why, how, and how you can get past it. So let me... All right, so, and the clicker's not working. Would you click to the next slide, please? All right, so my first slide that comes up, this is my only slide that has lots of words on it. All the rest of them are going to be images. But pretty much what I want to talk to you about is what endogamy is. It's the title of this talk, and it's something that anybody who has Jewish ancestry is going to have. So endogamy is not just if you have first cousins, second cousins marrying within a family. It's an endemic thing where generation after generation after generation, people are marrying cousins. They're not necessarily realizing they're marrying cousins, but if you're Jewish, that's what's been done for centuries, right? Jewish people are all descended from a small group of people whose descendants all married one another. So everybody was marrying distant cousins, even if it wasn't a conscious decision to do so. And because of that, Jewish people tend to share a lot of DNA with one another, even if they're not related in an amount of time that you can potentially even trace back. And so when the different DNA companies are looking at you and somebody else who's Jewish, they're like, oh, that's a lot of shared DNA. You're probably third cousins or fourth cousins, when you might really be 12 cousins in 27 ways. And that adds up to be a lot of shared DNA, right? So that's kind of what's happening here. And that's why you're seeing what you see. So if you would hit the next slide, please.
This should work now.
Okay.
It should work.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you'll see that on the next one. But Jews aren't the only people that have to deal with endogamy, right? So endogamy is, in the Jewish community, it was mostly because of religious and social restrictions, right? Jewish people were told to marry Jews, and Jews were considered not marriageable by everybody else. So it was kind of you had to marry within the community. Other people, it's by geography. If you lived in the Hawaiian Islands, you were pretty constricted in who you were able to marry for geographic reasons. So Hawaiians also have endogamy, to a point that they make Ashkenazic endogamy look easy to deal with. Like, seriously. You also have, to a lesser extent, colonial Americans, right? People who came over really early only could marry the other people who came over really early, and so there's some endogamy in those communities as well. So it's not just Jews, but that's pretty much who I'm going to focus on because you're the JGS. All right, so just to give you an idea of what's happening, this is one of my fifth great-grandfathers, and just looking at all of his descendants. And you can see, basically, you can see his children, his grandchildren, all the way down. You can see a lot of it kind of ends, unfortunately, in the 1940s, because a lot of people who didn't come to America pre-war were killed. But until that point, you could see people are marrying distant cousins. They're marrying third and fourth cousins. They might not have even realized they were third and fourth cousins. And they were probably distant cousins in other ways, too. but this is what was happening over and over again, not just in this one family, but throughout the entire Jewish community for centuries or millennia even. And so this is why endogamy is such an issue in the Jewish community. This is one of my favorite records from my own family, and it's kind of showing you what's happening. This is from not too long ago. This is from 1927, and it's a marriage record. And what you see here is you have the groom, Shlomo Fuchs, who was the son of Chaim Fuchs and Devorah, whose maiden name was Fuchs. He was married. The bride was Reza Fuchs, and her parents were, guess, Leba Fuchs, and guess what Vega's maiden name is going to be? You got it, Fuchs. And the two witnesses are Chaim and Ezra Fuchs. So in this case, they probably knew they were cousins. I think that they were fifth cousins to one another. So they had the same surname from the same town. They probably realized it. But in many other cases, people who didn't necessarily have the same surnames were doing the same thing and marrying cousins and marrying cousins and marrying cousins, and causing us who now have genetic genealogy to kind of scratch our heads when we see what results. So here's what the results like, especially for those of you who haven't taken a test, or for those of you who don't have Jewish ancestry but who are interested in what endogamy looks like. So on Ancestry, up until 2017, they would tell you the number of fourth cousins or closer, and then they changed it because the Jews were causing too much computational issues with how many fourth cousins are closer. So now, if you have under 1,000, it gives you a number, and otherwise it says 1,000 plus. I'm at about 18,000 now. So 18,000 or 8,000 fourth cousins or closer, I don't have that many fourth cousins or closer. I don't have that many fourth cousins or closer who have tested on Ancestry. So endogamy is causing people who must be further related to me than fourth cousins to be predicted to be closer than they are. So that's a problem. And you could see, and one other thing I want to point out, people get really hung up on the small percentages of ethnicity. Let's take a look at what the different companies give. So Ancestry currently says I'm 100% Jewish. They're right. I have good documentation. That's cool. Family Tree DNA has me as 99% Jewish. It's a little bit of West Middle East. I have to get to page 12 of my results before I get past potential second cousins. Yeah, I don't have that many second cousins. I know all my second cousins. That isn't true, right? They're predicting people to be much more closely related than they actually are. 23andMe. 23andMe only gives you a limited number of results, and as you get new closer ones, they just age off some of the other ones. So pretty much everybody, I've been at the max since I tested with them back in 2013. I've just gotten some newer matches and they've gotten rid of others. They only have me as 98.5% Jewish, with some Northwestern and Southwestern European in there. In MyHeritage, the Jewish company, because they're located in Israel, only has me as 96.6% Jew, or 89.9% Jewish, with a smattering of random other things. So the side point is, don't put too much credence in those ethnic predictions unless they're really far off from what you think. But they also give me thousands and thousands of close relatives, and they're not. And so the question is, how do you know which matches are worth concentrating on, right? I administer over 90 DNA kits. I have a DNA problem, and in fact, if anybody here is my relative, I have a kit with me, and I will test you. I'm not joking. In LA a couple weeks ago, I tested 2 people. And so, with my own, when I have 18,000 on Ancestry alone for my own kit, times 90 times the 4 companies, there's no way that I can contact all those people, even if it was just my own. I have a full-time job, and I come to places like Orlando on the weekends, so there's no way. So you need to figure out which ones have the best chance of getting you to where you want to be. But first, I'm going to kind of show you why this is happening. Okay, so here's an example. I have this person, initial S, who is predicted to be my second to third cousin. And that's pretty close, right? I have a really well-documented tree. If this person is my second to third cousin, I should be able to figure out the connection, right? So you could spend a lot of time working with this person and going down rabbit holes trying to figure out how on earth you can be connected. Now, I've been fortunate in that I've been able to test both of my parents. So I should be able to look at my mother's and my father's to be able to figure out, let's narrow down which side this person's connected on. So my father is predicted to be a fifth to remote cousin, so really distant to this person that I'm second to third. So you'd think the connection's through my mom, except she's also predicted to be a fifth to remote cousin. So if my parents are both distant, how could I be second to third? And for those of you who are thinking, are her parents really her parents? DNA shows yes, because if they weren't my biological parents, this would make a lot of sense. But they are both my biological parents. This person cannot be my second to third cousin when they're so distantly related to both of my parents. So what's happening here? So for those of you who haven't seen it, this is an example of what's called a chromosome browser. You have 23 sets of chromosomes, and the orange bits or segments are bits that my father shares with this person. So my father shares a couple of small little bits with this person, and so that's why the algorithm says, yeah, you share a little bit of DNA. We'll say fifth to distant. Sounds about right. My mom shares some little bits with this person, and so it's fifth to distant. Now, I inherit 50% of my mother's DNA and 50% of my father's DNA. What happens if I pretty much inherit all the orange bits? It looks to be a lot closer than it is, right? So I share a lot of little bits of DNA, and so the algorithm says, hey, you share a lot, second to third cousin for sure, except it can't be because of that, right? And even if we can narrow it down to being from one of my parents, what's not to say that those little bits are some from my grandmother and some from my grandfather, right? Because endogamy can be generation after generation. All these little bits are coming together. So this is why even if somebody's only half, a quarter, an eighth Ashkenazi Jewish, endogamy still can be an issue. So I'm going to show you another example. This person, so what you're seeing here are kind of the amounts of DNA that I share with these people, right? So it's centimorgans is a measure kind of how much DNA, how many chunks of those orange segments, and this is the size of the largest one of those orange segments. So we have this person E, and I'm like, okay, let's do the same thing. Let's look at both of my parents and narrow this down again, and look at this person's match. And this person does not appear as a match to either of my parents. But this person matches me as a second to third cousin. But again, not to my parents, not at all, not a match whatsoever. So here's my match with this person. I can't really look at my parents' matches with this person because they don't come up as matches. But I must be getting, they must have had small enough little bits, and I just got every little bit that they shared with this person. And it was enough to say second to third cousin, right? So this is what's happening with a lot of those matches that are predicted to be pretty close. They're not. You're getting them from multiple both your parents, from multiple grandparents, great-grandparents, and it just sums to be a lot because everybody's Jewish. I get people all the time, and they're like, I match 15 of your kits. And I'm like, it probably just means you're Jewish. But let's look, right? So the question is how do you even solve this? And for those of you who are on Facebook and on some of the other pages that talk about how to find matches, because of what's happening here, a lot of the strategies that you can use to find cousins don't work when you're from an endogamous population. So when you go onto these different pages, people will say, oh, you share 120 centimorgans with this person. Then you need to be from one of the following categories of cousins. They're going to be your second cousin once removed. Yeah, that works really well when you're not Jewish. And it works really poorly when you are Jewish. So I'm going to show you kind of what's happening. I've told you I've tested a lot of my family members. And so here are people on my grandfather's mother's father's side. And so the people in yellow are people who I've actually tested on this branch. And over here are the people, how they're related to me, how much DNA I actually share with them, and then how much I'd be expected to share with them given the known connection. So like if you look at Myron up there, given Myron's known connection, we should share about 53 centimorgans of DNA. We share 174, right? So more than 3 times what we'd expect. And in fact, everybody on here, I have significantly more DNA with them than I'd expect to share. So these are people where I know the connection. When you have people, if I didn't know Myron and he had independently tested, I'm going to be looking for 174 centimorgans. I'm going to be looking for somebody much more closely related than second cousin twice removed, because that's what you're supposed to do if you're not Jewish. But if you are Jewish, endogamy, even for known cousins, bumps up the amount of shared DNA, because you have the DNA you shared from those close relatives and then all these little bits from all those ancestors really far back that add up to be a reasonably high amount. So, and it's not just this. I've been accused, like, you cherry picked one branch of your family, so I added this in where, okay, well, look at my grandmother's side of the family. Same idea. All these people I've tested. And again, this is how much I'd expect to share, and I share significantly more DNA with these people than I'd expect, given the known relationships, right? Down here we have my cousin Ron in Australia. I should share about 26, I share 100, 4 times as much DNA. So that makes an incredibly huge difference in how I go after trying to figure out how Ron is related or how any of these other people are related. Now, on this, I told you I've tested people. It can be an expensive hobby. So one of my favorite cousins right here is my cousin Jonathan, because he's a genealogist, so he paid to test himself and his mother. I love my cousin Jonathan. I've never met him. He actually lives in Australia. We've reconnected recently. So, and because Jonathan's a genealogist, he knows about all the other branches of his family. So I know how we're related. His mother's grandparents were actually first cousins to one another. So I'm related through both Judith's grandmother Reza and her grandfather Shmuel Hirsch. But Judith's other side and Jonathan's father are from geographically very separate parts of the world. So I know this should be the only relationship. Jonathan's father's family is from Germany. I have no German ancestry back to the 1700s. So this is our connection. But let's look at what happens. So over here you see Judith and Jonathan, who I should share 26 and 13, and I share 186, 182, because go endogamy. And let's look at what we have. So I'm going to look at a chromosome browser just like we did before. But what we have here is we have orange are segments that I share with Judith, the mom, and blue are segments that I share with Jonathan, the son. So it makes sense that there's going to be some segments that I share with the mom that she didn't give to her son. She only gives him 50% of her DNA. So she gave him not that 50% of the DNA. And over here on chromosome 18, we matched and she gave that full segment to her son. But then you have little bits like over here in 7 and over here in 19 where Jonathan has DNA that his mom doesn't share with me, which means that I'm related to Jonathan's German father. Even though I shouldn't be, but he's Jewish, I'm Jewish, endogamy. So on paper, we won't be able to prove our relationship. But in some way, I'm related to Jonathan's father because of those lone blue segments, right? And it gets more fun. So here's me and my mother and how we match Jonathan. So I share 182 centimorgans with Jonathan. My mom should share more, but she doesn't, which means that in some way I'm related to Jonathan through my father, even though on paper, nope. So how are we related? So on the previous slide, we saw because of those lone blue segments, I'm related somehow through endogamy to Jonathan's father. Up here, we see in some way Jonathan's related to my father. And on paper, we have it very well documented that our mothers are connected to one another. So we're related through my mother, my father, and his mother. So this is what endogamy is doing, and this is why you're getting the results that you get. All right? But it's not all doom and gloom, right? So until now, it's like, yeah, endogamy makes things more difficult. But you can still have successes. We were talking earlier, like, can you do anything with DNA? You can. So I'm going to talk about a success. I got this guy named Dave who came up as a match. And I'm like, who are you? And here's the story he tells me. He says, well, my great-grandmother was a Diamond. I said, well, that's cool, but I had this discussion with someone else here earlier. Diamond's a pretty common name. Most of my Diamond family was killed in the Holocaust, and so probably not the connection, but what do you know? Well, his great-grandmother was born in Russia. And I'm like, not helpful, because the Russian Empire was huge. What was her Jewish name? I don't know. Her name was Jenny Diamond Dorfman. And I'm kind of, where did she live? She lived in Detroit. She had 6 kids. And then he says, oh, there's a letter. I'm like, oh, what's the letter? So he sends me the letter. This was a letter that Jenny's daughter Ida wrote in 1980 to one of Dave's cousins for a school project. And it started out, dear sweetie, I'd love to help you, and I hope you get an A. And then she talks about, I was born in a small town in Russia. But, she says, we arrived in New York on December 16th, 1913. What do you do when you find that? Shit manifest. Shit manifest, right? Because DNA cannot stand in a vacuum. With DNA, you need to use this traditional genealogical documentation research. So I found, sure enough, the Dorfmans with Shayna, who became Jenny, Chaya, who's the Ida who wrote the letter, and Hirsch, who's the little brother she talks about in the letter, that she and her little brother came with their mother to join their father in America. And it gives the name of the town they were from as being Biscopich. Now, who here's been to Biscopich? Yeah, I think that's just me. That's pretty much the whole village. You'd have no reason to go there. It's where my grandfather was born. I was there in 2016, and as of 2016, they still have wells and no running water. They don't have electricity other than a generator that they all share to charge cell phones. And that's the whole town. So if Jenny's from Diamond from Biscopich, she's related. So I went online and I found the Detroit Jewish Cemetery Association had a really nice database, and they told me which cemetery she was buried in. And I put a request on Find a Grave. And the very next day, a wonderful man named Gerard Brownstone took this photo for me. And Jenny was Shandel, the daughter of Hillel. Now, Hillel was my great-great-grandfather. My grandfather on this side died in 1993. And I had sat down with him, and he was a survivor. He did not like to talk about the war. My grandmother only liked to talk about the war. So I could tell you all of her stories. But I finally said to my grandfather, I said, just once. And he said, this is the only time, ask me all the questions you want to ask, because I'm never answering again. And so one of the things I asked were the names of his aunts and uncles. And he told me he had an Aunt Shandel. And I said, what happened to her? She was lost. So sometime probably 1988, 1989, in my family tree maker for DOS, I wrote Shandel Diamond killed in Holocaust. And I haven't looked for her since. Shandel Diamond lived in Detroit, had 6 kids. One of those kids alone had 12 kids. We have this huge, huge family in Detroit that we didn't know about. This was last summer. I went to visit them. Now I have cousins in Detroit that have a lake house, which was like a bonus. Walking in there, I have the diamond blue eyes. Half of them had the diamond blue eyes. The other half had married into the family. And it was incredible. We've been separated for years, and now we know that one another exists. So this was a case where I wasn't even going to be looking for documentation, because I had Shandel Diamond killed in Holocaust. I wasn't looking for her. I wasn't. My father has living second cousins on this diamond side where everybody was killed except for the ones that weren't. My grandfather had living first cousins and an aunt in America. Who knew? So take that, endogamy. You can still have successes. But Dave, the guy I originally matched, he's only a quarter Jewish. So could endogamy not be a factor? So here's the situation we have. We have myself and Dave. We're actually third cousins. Dave's related through my grandfather. Now, my grandmother is not related to him. And I tested her before she passed away in 2015. And my grandmother, who should not be related to 25% Jewish Dave, comes up as Dave's second to fourth cousin. So endogamy is still a factor at the 25% Jewish range. But despite that, we're still reconnected to this branch of the family that we didn't know existed. All right, so endogamy is still a problem. But I'm getting down again, and it's supposed to be good. So I'm going to show you some other successes that you can have. So I got contacted by this guy named Abishai, and he's like, hey, you come up as second to fourth cousins. I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do. What do you know about your family? And he had a very interesting story. So his mother was born pretty soon after World War II to 2 Holocaust survivors, Abraham Rutner and Julia Berkowitz. And she was born in what's now Subcarpathian Ukraine. When she was very young, by the age of 5 or so, both of her parents had died, and she ended up in an orphanage. Somehow, one of Julia's brothers who had survived found her, took her to Israel, and she was raised with Julia's surviving siblings, family, and all that. So she knew about the Berkowitz side. She didn't really know a lot about the Rutner side. But my great-grandmother was a Rutner. So I'm like, okay, this could be interesting. I said, what else does she know? And she didn't know a lot. She knew that her father, Abraham, was one of 12 children. She only knew the names of 3 of them. One of the ones that she knew was Hensha Rutner, who was married to a man named Yaakov Hach. That's pretty much all she knew. So I went onto Yad Vashem's website. For those of you, how many people here have not seen a page of testimony? Have not. So Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And after the Holocaust, they had people fill out these pages to memorialize people they knew who were killed in the war. and they digitize them. They're on Yad Vashem's website, and you can search in English or in Hebrew. And I found a page of testimony for Hensha. It has her name here as Helena. Hensha is a common nickname. Maiden name Rutner, married name Hach. And it gives me information. It gives me the town she was from. She was from the town of Veliatin. It gives me the names of her parents. It says Ephraim Rutner and Rachel Farkash. And Veliatin is pretty close to where my Rutner family lived in what's now called Koludna. So this looks promising because we have a surname in common. We have a general geographic area. So here's your first lesson in DNA. Be a good DNA match to me because I will do all your research. So I got the records for Veliatin. And sure enough, I found the marriage record of Ephraim and Rachel. So we have them here. They have Ephraim's name is Fishel. Fishel is the Yiddish version of Ephraim, which is the Hebrew. And it says that Fishel or Ephraim is from Darva. Darva is the Hungarian name for what's now called Koludna, which is my family's town. That's awesome. Gives me his parents' names as Isaac Rutner and Sarah Leibowitz. And I already had all the records for Koludna. And so I'm like, I know who these people were. This is another son I didn't know existed because he's from the years when you didn't bother registering most of your kids' births. And this is the connection between Avishai's grandfather and my grandmother. Avishai and I are actually sixth cousins. And that's often often you don't match your sixth cousins more than just with endogamy. But in this case, we just happen to inherit a lot of the shared DNA. So Avishai's mother, who didn't even know her grandparents' names, now has her family back to the 1700s. I was able to tell her about second cousins who live in Israel that she didn't know about. She grew up about 4 miles away from where they lived, and they're back in touch. So DNA can help you do these things. I never would have known to reach out to this family because I didn't know this guy existed. I wasn't looking in Veliatin because I didn't know we had relatives there, but we did. And until now, I've been showing lots of family tree DNA. I'm going to show you some of the other platforms. You can have success here too. All right, so this is what you can see on 23andMe. The first two, these are actually, remember Jonathan, my Australian cousin? These are his mother and his aunt. Then we have this woman who, once I looked at her DNA, is just an endogamous match. She matches my mom a little bit. She matches my dad a little bit. She doesn't really, nothing too exciting. And then there's this guy, Mark. And we shared a reasonable amount of DNA. And one of the things you're going to see that I'm going to talk about as a strategy is you want to look at kind of the size of these segments that you share, right? Because if you think about it, every generation, your DNA gets divided up. So with endogamy, you see lots of little bits of DNA that add up to be a lot, but they've been divided up over many generations. But closer relatives, you tend to share larger segments. So those orange bars on this chromosome browser that you saw before, you want them to be big. And so here, we have a lot of DNA over a few segments. There's some large segments in there. And he had a nice profile. He talks about how his mother and grandfather passed away in 2005. There's a big hole in his understanding. Both sides are Jewish, which isn't a surprise to him because he's a rabbi. So there you have it, contact him. And I contacted him. And he wrote back, and I asked him what his mother and grandmother's maiden names were. And as soon as he gave them to me, I'm like, you're in my tree already. I sent him this picture, and I said, Snazzy Saddle Shoes Cousin Mark. That's actually him. When I copied my great aunt's pictures that her daughter let me borrow for one day to copy and give back to her, there was a picture of Mark. This branch of the family had moved out to California and lost touch with the East Coast side. And so we are back in touch with Mark, who's actually my third cousin. And so I was able to give him his grandparents' marriage records and his great-grandparents and all kinds of stuff all the way back, and a family that he didn't really know a lot about. And we are back in touch. We're Facebook friends now. But this is only because of a robust tree, right? If I hadn't done the research already, and if I didn't know his mother and grandmother's names, neither of which is one of my ancestral names, because it's his great-grandmother, Tolchin, back here, who has the same name as my mother, just telling me Krasnow or Rosenthal wouldn't have meant anything. But because I had done the research and I had them, I could figure out pretty easily where he fit in. So that's kind of a critical point. Ancestry. Right now, Ancestry has the largest database. So it has the largest number of people who have tested. So it's good to get your DNA in there. It's good to get your DNA in all of the different companies because you don't know where your magical match has tested. But I matched somebody with Toby, named Toby. And remember I told you before about the large segments? So in my day job, I'm a mathematician. So I take advantage of a really important mathematical tool called division. Yes, see, some of you have heard of it. So here it's telling me that I share 140 centimorgans across 8 segments. So I can figure out pretty easily what the average segment size is going to be. So the average segment size using that magical division is going to be about 17 and a half centimorgans, which means there's probably some bigger. And like 20, 25 is kind of what you want to look for as a minimum for those large segments. So odds are there's probably one in here. Now, Ancestry doesn't give you access to a chromosome browser, so I don't know for sure, but it's probably worth reaching out to this person, and I did. And what you can do if somebody's tested on Ancestry, you can ask them if they're willing to move their DNA onto other platforms, one of which is GEDmatch. So GEDmatch is free. The one thing that people need to be aware of, you probably heard a lot recently about how genetic genealogy is being used to solve cold cases. It's primarily being done with GEDmatch right now, a little bit of family tree DNA. So if you are uncomfortable and you think a close relative of yours is probably not a nice person, this could potentially help them be caught. Some people are uncomfortable with that. Some people think it's a good thing. If my cousin's a murderer, let them be found. But it's just something to be aware of if you do move on to GEDmatch, just so you're informed of things it could be used for. But GEDmatch is really powerful because you could put your DNA there regardless of what platform you tested on. So if you only tested on Ancestry, you could be comparing your DNA with people who tested at 23andMe, who put their DNA onto GEDmatch. And on GEDmatch, unlike Ancestry, you can look at the size of those segments that you share with the people. So when I moved my DNA onto GEDmatch, or my DNA was on GEDmatch, I asked Toby if she would move hers, and she did. We share 3 pretty large segments, 20.3, 28.9, and 1/30. So I'm like, okay, there's something here. I looked at both my parents, and I could see it was through my father, and then I was able to look at my grandmother, and it's obviously on my grandmother's side, because we even have a 43 centimorgan segment that she shares with Toby. So there's something good happening here. Went back and forth with her a little, and it was kind of weird because that very day I had gotten a box of things from my grandmother's basement, and I was going through and scanning them. And one of the things that was in the box were favors from Toby's grandparents' wedding, 3 of them, because my grandmother kept everything, with pictures of the bride and groom that said, "Thank you for celebrating with us." Toby had never seen them, so I dropped 2 of them in the mail because I don't need 3 copies of her grandparents' thank you cards. But that was because of DNA. We wouldn't have connected. And right here, we have Toby's my 3rd cousin once removed. And this is on a family side of the family that really doesn't have a lot. My grandmother was the only surviving child of a family where none of her aunts, uncles, or first cousins survived. And none of her second cousins survived. So 3rd cousins is pretty much where you're going to be. And we got it. And so because of endogamy, you have to be really careful with the words that are used, because you can get encouraged in a place where maybe you shouldn't get encouraged. So Ancestry uses things to say we are extremely confident, or we are kind of confident, or we're a little confident in the fact that this person's related to you in this way. And again, non-endogamous, they're usually pretty good with that. If you're Jewish, sometimes yes, sometimes no. So here was somebody who Ancestry predicted to be my 3rd to 4th cousin with extremely high confidence. Now, when you hear extremely high, you're like, I'm going to pursue this because I should be able, Ancestry is extremely highly confident that I am connected to this person. I'm going to be able to figure this out. But I had this person move over to GEDmatch and take a look. All these little bits, endogamy. We are not 3rd to 4th cousins. I'm Jewish, they're Jewish. That's great, but it's not something that's going to help us get connected. So you need to be really careful. People are like, but Ancestry says it's extremely high. And I'm like, that's great, but they're wrong. So you need to be really careful. I've been talking with Ancestry. I'm trying to get them to add in at least what the largest segment is to help people to know which things to zero in on. Every time I see Krista Cowan from Ancestry at a conference and I start walking over to her, she goes, longest segment. I'm like, yep. So eventually she'll get annoyed and she'll just do it, maybe. So another Ancestry successful story. And again, Ancestry is somewhere you want to be on as many of these different companies as possible. But Ancestry right now does have the largest database. Here was somebody else I asked to move over, and we have some large segments. We have 2 over 20 and a bunch of little ones, which could be because of endogamy or whatever. And I asked names, locations, and his location was pretty close to mine. I talked about Kaledna earlier. It's where my grandmother's parents came from. there's a town named, now it's called Julia. Its name during Hungarian times was Uglia, which for an English speaker is ugly A, which I always giggle. To tell you how close those two towns are, when I was in Koledna, we were asking local people where the Jewish cemetery was. We ended up in the Uglia Jewish cemetery because they're that close, right? Google Maps says they're 2 kilometers apart, but I think that's just from the town centers. They're essentially one largish village.
What country is this?
So this is currently Subcarpathian Ukraine, right? It's really near the Romanian border. When my great-grandfather left, it was Hungary. When my great-grandmother left, it was Czechoslovakia. For about 2 months, it was Transcarpathian Rus, it was USSR, and now it's Ukraine. So it makes, I give another talk about all the places I found, all the current countries where records for this one little town are held all over the place because of how borders changed.
What province is it?
It's Zakarpattia Oblast now. It was in Maramaros Mezhia when it was in Hungary. Or Marmaros, depending on, sure. And so I've been working on this guy's tree because, again, you want to match me. And I've gotten back to 3 family names which are the same as mine. And I haven't managed to connect us, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be able to, and I'm still working on this, right? So this is just to show you, this isn't yet a success, but it's a success in progress because DNA doesn't give you the answer. It just points you to where you can potentially look to find the connection, right? If you get parent-child, you're done. But any further than that, you need to kind of figure out what the connection is. All right, so on GEDmatch, and again, if you're not worried about implicating your criminal cousins, move your DNA onto GEDmatch. You can move it there regardless of where you tested for free. And once you're there, you can look at the one-to-many and see everybody else on GEDmatch who you match. Now, GEDmatch, it keeps them playing around with their interfaces, so this week it actually looks a little different, and next week it'll look different again. But they all give you kind of the same information, where it gives you the total amount of DNA you share, the largest centimorgan, right, so the largest segment, which is what we talked about is really important, you want to look at when you're Jewish, how many generations away they predict you are. If you're Jewish, ignore that. If you're Jewish, totally ignore this. Yes, because unless it's like really, really close, like 2 or less, ignore it. Because it'll just mean you're matching a bunch of Jewish people, and it'll say about 3 to 4 generations for almost everybody who's Jewish. So totally ignore it. And then it gives you the amount of X that you share, and we're not going to talk about that right now. That's a whole separate talk. All right, and that's pretty much giving me in the order, highest to lowest, the amount of total centimorgans that we share. So if you add up all those little bits of orange from that chromosome browser that we were seeing before, how much shared DNA do you have? So this is my uncle, and his closest match is my mother, so that's a good thing. And then me and his aunts and his first cousins, right? I've tested a lot of people, so you're seeing a lot of people that I've tested and a couple that I've happened upon because they tested independently. And then you kind of have this unknown relationship in the middle of people I know. So one might think these unknown relationships might be people that are worth pursuing because they share the same, within the same amount of DNA of people that I know and people that I don't know. But if you kind of ignore that and just look at the largest segment, you can see where those people are. So if you're looking down, all of these numbers are really high, above 20 and mostly above 30. And here we hit 14. Those are those unknown relationships. This is just going to be an endogamous match, but we just share a lot of those little bits. And then the next person's 30 again because there's somebody who's an actual third cousin, right? So just looking at that shared DNA is not all you want to look at. You also want to look at that largest segment. So you can click on the arrow below largest segment, and it'll sort it for you by largest segment. So again, my mother, me, and then we have some other cousins, and then we have these unknown people in the middle. And maybe some of those are interesting. But you can also see, now look at the total amount of centimorgans. When you get down to the unknown relationships, they drop down much lower, right? So there's kind of this interplay that you want to look at between the total amount of DNA you share with somebody and the largest segment. If you want to pick one over the other, concentrate on those largest segments because some of those can be transmitted for many generations. So it could be that this 36 centimorgan segment's been passed down both lines of the family for many generations, but maybe not. You might want to contact those people. But in general, The people you want to contact, the majority of the people who I know how they're connected, tend to have a largest segment at least 20, in most cases over 30, and share at least 100 centimorgans with my uncle. This is a pretty good rule of thumb to start with in prioritizing which of your matches you want to contact, right? You're not contacting all of those 20,000 matches on Ancestry and the Family Tree DNA and the GEDmatch and the 23andMe. This is where you want to start, right? So this is a good start. And then look at the people who have large segments and slightly smaller amounts of total. That's where you're going to want to prioritize. Now, you're going to lose some people. There are going to be some cousins that are true traceable cousins who don't meet this criteria. But you're going to winnow out a lot of those extraneous matches and give you a better chance of actually being able to connect to the people you contact with. Unless you have a lot of time in your day to message 20,000 people, this is a really good strategy to kind of start off with. Now, these are the numbers you want to deal with when you're dealing with Ashkenazic matches. If you're from another endogamous ethnicity, the numbers are going to be slightly different, but the concept of those large segments is still going to be the same, because those are the ones that tend not to have divided and divided and divided over multiple generations, and you're going to have the largest success rate in potentially finding out how you're related to these people. All right, so I talked to you about how you might be winnowing out. So I'm going to tell you kind of a story that happened, which is kind of a cautionary tale. So my great-great-great-grandmother was a woman named Mira Halpern. She got married to her first husband when she was 15, he was 16. When she was pregnant, she was 23 years old, pregnant with their fifth kid, he died. Cause of death is disease, according to his death record. A couple years later, she's a widow with 5 little kids. She remarries a man who's 30-some years older than her, who had at least 6 kids from his first marriage. He was a widower. They then had at least 6 children together before he died. She ended up coming to America. And most of the kids came to America, either the United States or South America. And I was trying to track down where they all went. And most of them I was able to find. They went all over the place. The ones in the US went to Brooklyn, Syracuse, Rochester, Toledo, Akron, Pittsburgh, Miami, and I'm probably missing a couple. But basically, they went all over the place. And most of the branches had no idea that the other ones existed. And one of the branches that I tracked down was from her second husband, who was a Marienhof. I'm descended from husband number 1, who was a Lafon. And so there was this guy named Herschel Marienhof. He came to America, became Harry. He had 3 sons, only one of whom had children, his son Alan. Alan had, according to Alan's wife's obituary, she was survived by her daughter Anne. So Anne is the only surviving descendant of Harry Marienhof. So I was trying to find Anne. She has a relatively common name. I searched for her everywhere. I contacted several Annes with her name who were not her, and I couldn't find her. So I did a blog post about her a couple years ago, and she used one of the great genealogical tools called Google, and she found herself. And she sent me a message like 3 or 4 years after I had written about her. And she's like, "You read about my grandfather, and I'm Anne." And I was like, "So nice to meet you. Do you want to take a DNA test?" And she did. And I was waiting every day. I'm logging on to see if Anne's results are back. And they came back. And I matched with one teeny segment with her. And that was it. And so I'm like, okay, was I wrong? Was somebody adopted along the way and didn't know it? Who knows what happened? So and I never would have contacted this person, right? I never she's probably number 4 million on my match list with one teeny segment. So what happened? Well, here's how my mother matches her. So my mother has 3 large segments that I just didn't happen to inherit those large segments. I get 50% of her DNA and not that 50% of her DNA. And it's not just my mom. I've tested a lot of people. And everybody shares a lot of DNA with Anne. We have here Sue, who is actually her second cousin. And they didn't know one another existed. Sue shares 489.8 centimorgans with the largest segment of 90, right? Everyone here shares like huge amounts with huge largest segments, except for me and Saddle Shoe Mark. Yeah, so Anne is who I thought she was. But if I use my strategy, I'm not going to contact Anne because she's not even my 4th cousin. She's she's probably predicted to be my fifth to distant, if even that. So you are going to miss out on some real matches, but this helps you to figure out a way to at least maximize the chance that you're going to be able to get in touch with people who you can trace. But you might have those ands mixed in there as well. But this is also a lesson in why you want to test a lot of people, because different people get different DNA, even siblings, right? My mom and my uncle share different amounts of DNA because they're not identical twins. They got different DNA from their parents. So sometimes one sibling could be a much better match than another. So the more people you test, the more expensive it gets, but the more chance you have of actually being able to say, hey, this person doesn't match me, but they match all these people. This is somebody who's worth reaching out to. Oh, and remember that little match I had with Anne, that 8.3 centimorgan segment? It actually came from my father, even though I'm related to Anne through my mother, because endogamy, right? So these are the kinds of things you have to put up with when you're endogamous. But you think about it, think about those poor non-endogamous people who get it easy, right? They log on to Ancestry and they're like, oh, I have a new third cousin. Okay, I know how we're related, and they're done. How boring is that? Whereas, for me, it might take 6 weeks, 2 months to figure out who to even contact and find the connections. And so it's so much more rewarding to do that. So when you get frustrated with endogamy, just think, those poor other people. And you get these really cool successes. All right, so on all the different companies, they have this thing called shared matches. And so, if Diane and I come up as cousins, and I don't know how we're related, I should be able to see who we share, who we share as matches. And so if she comes up with, say, my uncle on my mother's side, I could be able to say, okay, I'm related through that side. And that works really well when you're not Jewish, but you need to be really, really careful when you're Jewish of drawing any conclusions based on shared matches. Because remember, everybody's related to everybody. So if you're half Jewish, this can be really useful because you'll say, okay, they're matching everybody on my Jewish side, or they're matching everybody on my non-Jewish side. But if you have Jewish on both sides, not helpful. Or if you're half Jewish and they say you're matching somebody on my grandmother's side, they also might be on your grandfather's side. So it's a problem, and you need to keep that in mind. So you need to be really careful of drawing conclusions. So here are my mom's matches. And she has people here matching from both sides of her family, all different branches, because remember, I have a problem. I have an addiction, and I've acknowledged it. So we have my mom's first cousin, Karen. Karen is her first cousin on her father's side, right? So my grandfather and Karen's mother are brother and sister. So if I look at who my mother shares with Karen, theoretically, we should be narrowing down to people on my grandfather's side. But if we do shared matches, because Karen's Jewish, we get the same list back minus Karen. Karen is cousins with all of my cousins on both the side she's supposed to be on and the side she's not. And geographically, right? And geographically, she's from a different side. My grandfather, when my grandparents got married, it's actually in the local Pittsburgh newspaper that there was a mixed marriage between a Russian Jew and a Hungarian Jew. It was a big deal. The Russians kept to the Russians, the Hungarians kept to the Hungarians. And when my grandparents got married, it was a big deal. But Karen matches everyone on my grandmother's side regardless. And the crazy thing is the Russians and Hungarians, because of border changes, they're all in Ukraine now anyway. So, yeah. So I was able to go to Ukraine and go to places, it would have been 6 different countries when my family left, but it's all in Ukraine now. So you need to be really careful with the shared matches. It's worth looking at them, but don't draw any hard and fast conclusions because endogamy messes with everything. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick summary of some takeaways that you need to take away if you're going to be doing any kind of genetic genealogy with Jewish DNA. It's kind of that interplay between the large segments and the total amount of DNA, right? That's what's critical. And the larger segments are the most important part. Okay. And also, DNA does not replace documentation. You need the documentation to figure out the connection unless you come up as a match to me, because I'll do the documentation for you. But it won't, people think DNA is going to tell you exactly how you're related, and it doesn't. It's just another tool in the genealogical toolkit that can point you towards where to look for things, where to look for records, and it's just another tool. It is harder, but I hope I've shown you that you can have successes, and I've had other successes with DNA. You can do it. It just takes time and effort, but it is possible. And sometimes you find things that you couldn't have found another way. And again, those shared matches, be really, really, really careful with them because everybody matches everybody. I bet you, if those of you who tested, if you go on right now and you look, you probably match 15 to 20 of my kits at least. And we won't be able to find a connection. All right, so one of the things I'm doing, I mentioned earlier how there's all these different places online where you can say, I share this much DNA with somebody, how am I related to them? Excuse me. I'll get in a minute, but thank you. So how are we related? And if you're not Jewish, they can say if you share 220 centimorgans, this is kind of, the range of relationships, and it doesn't work when you're Jewish. So I am collecting data on Jewish DNA, and I'm putting all the results out there on my blog, free for everyone to use, so that we can get an understanding of what real Jewish matches look like. So if you've tested, and you have known cousins who have tested, so I only want if you know how you're related, give me that information. Tell me, I tested, my third cousin tested, we share 121 centimorgans with the largest segment of 31. And this URL right there, you can go and fill out a form and I'll get that data. And in a couple of weeks, I'm actually going to be putting out the next iteration because I have over 6,000 data points already. I published probably about 6 months ago, but I've gotten a lot more. So I'd love more data because the more data that people contribute, the more we can get an understanding for all of us of what Jewish relatives look like. I also asked for what % Jewish people are, so you can get an idea if you're 50% Jewish, your match is 50% Jewish, how the numbers might change. So please, if you've tested and have known relatives, please contribute and help everybody. And again, the results will be out there for the world. So with that, and I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes?
Get a result or list of results on family tree,
Mm-hmm.
and has a name and a number, 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4.
Okay, so
What are those numbers?
that's a different test. That sounds like it's either a Y-DNA or a mitochondrial. Okay, so there's all endogamy comes into play when you're dealing with autosomal. Y and mitochondrial are different tests, and there's other issues when you're Jewish that you have to deal with. For example, Y-DNA, for those of you who don't know, Y-DNA, men have it, and they get it from their father's father, straight line. So theoretically, if my father, who's a diamond, tests, he should match other diamonds who descend from the same common ancestor. And that works nicely if you're, say, from England, where you've had surnames for a long time. But most Eastern European Jews have only had surnames for about 200 years. So if you test and somebody else tests who when you have a common male ancestor within 200 or so years, you'd hope you have the same surname. But if it's 210 years ago, you could have had 3 brothers who took 3 different surnames. And so it makes it harder just because we haven't had surnames for very long to do it. But it's a good way to prove or disprove. There's someone here who mentioned he has diamond relatives, and I asked, have any of your diamonds taken a Y-DNA test? Because that's a really easy way to see, do they match my father, do they not? Those numbers that you're seeing, so that's a whole talk in and of itself, but it's basically Y mutates relatively infrequently. So it's the number of mutations that have happened between you and them. And so you can get an idea of how far away that common ancestor would have been. Yeah. Number is the number of mutations.
Strategy on whom to test and how to test. Is Y-DNA comparable to mitochondrial? Is it?
It depends. It depends what the answer is that you want to answer, right? So Y is really a really good way if you have 2 people with the same surname and you want to see if there's a common male ancestor, and you could get that done. Assuming you're from the part of Europe where people didn't take their mother's names. That happened a lot in parts of Austria-Hungary where people had religious marriages, but they never registered their marriages, so that the community considered them married, but the government didn't. So their kids were considered illegitimate and often took the mother's name. So that messes up Y too. Mitochondrial is passed down through the mother's 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 mother. It's a little harder to deal with because, first of all, it mutates much less frequently. So you could have an exact mitochondrial match, and your common direct female ancestor could be 1,500 years ago. And surnames tend to change every generation through the female line. So I've tested people in Y and mitochondrial. I've had one huge mitochondrial success. I've had several Ys and a ton of autosomal. But if you have a specific question you want to answer, you think two people descend from a set of sisters and it's a direct female line, mitochondrial can help to either disprove it or add another piece of evidence to the fact that it might be true. Thank you.
On your recent question, for example, I have first cousins, I have quite a few, and my mother's had 3 brothers, 2 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, her children, the sister's children, they would have ones that descended from the sisters would have the mitochondrial DNA that would be similar.
But so would you, because it's your mother. So you'd have the same, if it's through your mother's side, you'd have the same mitochondrial DNA as those cousins would.
Right, now, how would that affect, so would that make me more like them, maybe temperamentally than the?
No, so that's only the mitochondrial. Autosomal DNA, which is all the DNA we're talking about here, which are the other 23, the 23 chromosomes. Those are the ones that are kind of make you, and you have the same chance of sharing with them as the same amount of DNA as you would through your uncles.
Okay, one more question, and that is one of the things I find difficult is to find when I look at this and karyotypes and all this. When I'm trying to look at a map, like what genes are on which chromosomes, I go to the Human Genome Project. I try to look at that. It would be neat if some company had a quick and dirty and saying, okay, here are the significant genes on chromosome 1, significant genes in chromosome 2.
Yeah, so some of the SNPedia does that.
Which are,
SNP, SNPedia will give you some of that information, but a lot of the companies besides 23andMe actually stay away from testing the parts of the genes that have medical information because they don't want to run afoul of the FDA. So they might have skipped the parts of the gene that you're interested in.
well, not necessarily medical, like what eye color, tell me what genes,
Yep. So those
what gene number on which chromosome and handles eye color,
Yep.
Height, and what's, of course you have to know the pattern of inheritance. I know we're getting into complex stuff, but it'd be kind of a little bit fun, like some of these genes, like one of the genes, chromosome 4, I think, is longevity. I was trying to, but it would be nice if there was a quick and dirty.
I don't think there is. And in genetic genealogy, it's not really concentrating as much on that because you're just looking at what you have in amounts of DNA you have in common, not necessarily on which genes. But there are sites that do that. You can look at Promethease and things like that and run your DNA through Promethease and see what it hits on. So that might be interesting. And 23andMe does give you some of that information straight out. So if you haven't tested there, you want to test not just with the ancestry, but the health also. The health will give you eye color, height, those kinds of things.
What's that?
23andMe has ancestry and health. If you get the health part, which costs extra above the ancestry, they'll give you some of the information I think you're looking for. Yes. Hi.
Thank you so much, because this is the area of ancestors and matching that I've not looked at. I've done a very large tree on Ancestry.com, and I wanted to ask you about the place where I and people who are not as involved as this, I found I run into trouble and get your advice. So I've been on Ancestry and Jewish Gen.
Mm-hmm.
I can find town records in the Pale and in Ukraine.
Okay.
I can't find last names. How do you get to last names?
Where are you finding the records that don't have last names? Are they pre-1800?
I can get some out of Jugen. You mentioned that you're part of the
Yeah.
Ukraine SIG.
Yeah. Which part of Ukraine are they from?
Offhand, I don't remember my grandmother's, but it's through Kiev. It's a little village right out of Kiev. I can see the town records for 3 of my grandparents.
Okay, so if you have those on Jewish Gen, you're very fortunate that you have three of the towns. They might not have everything up there. One of the nice things if your family's from near Kiev, who here has heard of Alex Krakowski and the work he's doing? Oh, wow. Okay. Alex Krakowski is this guy who lives in Ukraine who has like one Jewish great-great-great-great-grandparents, actually they're Krakowski, and he's a genealogist. And he has been going into various Ukrainian archives and photographing full record books and putting them online. And then when they try to kick him out, he sues them and he wins. He's done this a couple times. He's really pretty incredible. And now, most of the record books that he has, he's just photographed. So they're not indexed, right? So you have to go through them. But he has, I mean, every day I go on and I look to see what's been added. And I have found records from my family's towns where I've paid people to go to Ukraine and photograph record books. And they're like, those don't exist. He photographed them. And he's based out of Kiev, so he does a lot of work in the Kiev archives. So you might want to look and see if he covers the particular towns that you're looking for, because these records are incredible. In one of my family's towns, I was able to get 100 years back than I had before, and I've been doing this for a really long time. So, Alex Krakowski, Krakovsky, Krakovsky, I think. He has a Wikipedia page on Ukrainian Wikipedia. It's all in Ukrainian. But Alex. But Google Translate, if you don't read Ukrainian, you can cut and paste it in there to at least see if your family's towns are there. And each line is a link to the actual record book. So the record book, you can't really use Google Translate because they're images, but they're pretty incredible. And so take a look and see if your family towns are covered. And if they're not, check back in 2 weeks. He's putting things up almost on a daily basis.
Listen, just to be quick with Ukraine question. My surname is very scarce in the United States, but it is rampant in Ukraine.
Okay. What is it?
Lit in Ukraine, it's Litvin.
Okay.
And the Litvins and the Litvinov, they're everywhere.
Yep.
One of them is Catholic, one of them is Christian, the other one is Jewish.
Okay.
So based on what I might, not this minute, but eventually want to try and connect to see, am I related to any of those people?
Yep. Yep. So what you'd want to do, you need to find a male with that surname who would test for you, and a male from another branch. I actually just got a DNA result that came back last night, which I was like so excited, and I need to go to sleep because I had a really early flight here this morning. I almost didn't sleep because it was really cool. So I have in my family, one of my great grandmother's maiden name was Supkoff, Supkoff, which is a relatively rare name. And I figured out when I found the records in Europe, the family name, that was the American version. It was actually Zubkis. And I found in America also Supkoffs and Zobkoffs. And I'm pretty sure they're connected. And I'm pretty sure I figured out how the Supkoffs and Supkoffs are connected. And I had written a blog post about it, which, again, somebody found and reached out to me. And his uncle was a male Supkoff. And I asked him to take a DNA test. And on autosomal, he doesn't match my family very well at all, because we'd be 6 cousins, right? So things have been divided up. We have lots of little segments. And so it's hard to tell, is this endogamy or is it real? But his Y results came back last night. And he's my Supkoff male cousin's closest match. And so I'm like, this is the case. So if you can find 2 male Litvins, Litwins, all of that, you can see, do they share a direct male line or not? Yeah, so the Supkoffs and Supkoffs are the same. Yes. Okay. I'll come back to you're next.
Okay, can I ask a question?
One of you, go for it.
The borders changing in the Ukraine.
Yes.
I just recently figured out my grandfather left Bukovina, which obviously doesn't exist anymore. It's part of Romania,
Yep.
was part of Ukraine. Has anyone done research on, and I understand about surnames didn't start until like 1700.
Yeah.
Any research on the Jewish diasporas of how they moved? I find little tiny bits of what earlier years they had to leave Germany and then they went where.
Yep, and there's a lot of people who look into that, but with your own family, because it was Russian Empire, if you find the original records, it'll give their towns of registration. There was a concept like around 1800 to 1810, people had to register as belonging to a particular town and a particular class. Yeah, and so
I found that recent, but I'm saying where before they ended up in.
Yep. So there's you can kind of look and see how people move. There's a lot of work with that. Hal Bookbinder speaks about that at the IJGS conferences most years. So he's probably, if you're going to be in Cleveland this year, I would say listen to his talk. He talks about how the borders changed and how people moved. So he'd be a good resource. Hal Bookbinder, he's out of California. Yeah. Yes.
As a byproduct of what your research has done with DNA, when you met all of these people that are related, have you done any survey of what kind of diseases, maladies that they have similar, so that you know what is in your family?
Yeah, so
you would know about and related to your children.
Are
you doing it on your own?
I'm doing kind of both. So if you look at death certificates, my father's family, everybody dies of either cancer or Nazis. And on my mother's family, everybody dies of heart disease. And so I said something to my mom. I was like, did you realize everybody, and she looks at me, she says, how did you know? And my mother doesn't like to talk about medical stuff. And I was like, what do you mean, how do you know? She says, I've been going to a cardiologist for 20 years. I have this. I'm like, I had no clue. And once I realized that, I reached out. I could see which branch of the family it was from, and I've reached out to some of these cousins, some who I've asked to test and some who I've discovered via DNA. And they've all said, oh yeah, my father died at 38 of a heart attack. And I'm like, so I tell everybody. I found a couple of people who, via DNA, we found out they were adopted. And so I was able to tell them, hey, you need to know this. You're on this side of the family. You need to have this information. And so, yeah, I've been kind of doing that, and I'm a big proponent of doing that because I think it's pretty critical. You can learn so much between death certificates and talking to DNA relatives.
That's one of the reasons why I started genealogy.
Okay, yeah, and it's important. It's really important. I mean, I found out some important information with 23andMe for myself, which was, and I've been able to share that with.
That information is not on any of the DNA tests.
So the only company that will give you medical information straight out is 23andMe. And 23andMe, actually, because they did that, they had some issues. About 5 years ago, the FDA said, you're giving medical advice to people and you can't do that. And they've almost shut them down. So for a while, they had to stop giving medical information, even though they still knew, but they couldn't give it to people. They finally have been they have to clear everything they tell test by test through the FDA before they can tell people. And so the other companies specifically stay away from the health information because they don't want to have to deal with the FDA. They're saying we're here for genetic genealogy, we're not here for health. 23andMe does, and there's more and more they keep adding back in. But it's oftentimes they only test for particular mutations. So they might say, you don't have any of the 3 mutations for cancer we test for, but you could have some of the other ones, right? Because they only test for very specific things. But if they test for a mutation you have, it's really important information to find out.
It's also elective.
Right.
You can take it for certain diseases.
Exactly. So the way it works, 23andMe, you can take it only for ancestry, and then you're just getting the same information you get from the other companies, or you're getting your cousin matches and your ethnic breakdown. You can also then you could do what they call their health plus ancestry. When they give you the health information, there's some things they give you straight out, but those are mostly things like your eye color and whether or not your ears are attached and things like that. They'll also give you things that you could be a carrier for straight out, right? If you're a Tay-Sachs carrier, that doesn't impact you, but it could impact your children if they have children with another carrier. So it gives you those things. Then there are certain things that are locked, and you have to say, I really, really, really want to see these. Alzheimer's, because it's dominant, right? If you see this, then you're going to know you're at a high risk for Alzheimer's. And some people don't want to know that, and some people do. And so they will say, are you sure? You say, yes. Are you really sure? Yes. Parkinson's is another one where they ask you, and the BRCA mutations, which are cancer, which if you're Jewish, they test for the 3 Jewish BRCA mutations that 1 in 40 Jewish people have. So those are the 3 things that are kind of locked. Crohn's disease, I think they'll tell you if you're at risk for it. You can go onto their website and they'll give you the whole list of everything that they test for. So you can know before you pay if they're testing for what you're interested in or not. Yeah, you can definitely see the list. One thing to realize though is that if there's something in your family, you can see if you're at risk, but also it can find things that you might not even have realized were in the family. So you can get some surprises. So just be aware of that, both on the health information and on the genetic genealogy side. I mean, you could find out that one of your brothers and sisters gave up a kid for adoption 50 years ago. Surprise, right? So,
They found an entire
Yep.
first cousin's children.
Yep.
It had a match.
Yep.
Found out that the aunt who had
Yep.
left to go to college really didn't leave to go to college.
Yep. Yep. So you find that. Some people find out their father wasn't their father, or that they were adopted and they didn't know it, right? So these are the things, you need to go in realizing you might be able to find your family, but you might find out your family wasn't exactly what you thought when you went into it. So, yes.
What software do you use for tree management locally, if anything?
I use Family Tree Maker because I've used it since the DOS days. I bought it with my babysitting money and I've just been upgrading it ever since. But I also like the fact that it syncs with Ancestry. So all of what I save on Ancestry gets synced to my hard drive, so I have a local copy too. Roots Magic does that as well. Yes?
How do you advise keeping all of this organized?
I'm not the right person to ask because I have it all in my head. I keep all my tree stuff and all the documentation and everything in Family Tree Maker. But most of the DNA stuff, I kind of have a picture in my head of a puzzle and it works for me, but I understand not everybody's brain works that way.
Do you know someone who's got a good system?
Different people use spreadsheets. Everyone uses different methodologies. Jim Bartlett has a blog called Segmentology, and he's written about some of what he does, but a lot of what he does doesn't apply as much to endogamy, because he's like, based on the shared matches, I know this person has to be over here, which doesn't work so well when you're Jewish. So yeah, I probably should be better organized, but that's just something that I play around in my head with. So, yeah.
So if you haven't done your DNA, so for the very first time, which one do you think would be?
So if you're only going to do one, at this point I would say do Ancestry. Once you get your results back from Ancestry, or if you've tested at another company, download that raw data. And you can, for free, upload it to Family Tree DNA, to MyHeritage, and to GEDmatch, and make use of the matches at those other companies also. For MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA, you're uploading for free. You pay a small fee. That's $19, I think, at Family Tree DNA, and MyHeritage is playing around with how much they charge, so see how much they charge you today, and if it's too much, try tomorrow. And for that, but it's somewhere between $20 and $30 usually. And for that, you open up all the tools that come with it, the chromosome browser, and MyHeritage now has triangulation tools and all different other things. So it's probably worth paying that little extra instead of retesting with them. Now, if you're testing an elderly relative, in addition to testing them at Ancestry, you might want to test them at Family Tree DNA as well. Family Tree DNA saves the sample. So, like, I tested my grandmother before she passed away. If in 5 years some crazy new DNA test that none of us can dream of is invented and they start selling it, I can ask them to run it on my grandmother's DNA. And so I think that's why I test almost everybody there for that reason. Also, their kits, when they fall out of my closet and they hit my head, are lighter than Ancestry's. That's happening.
What is the actual issue on privacy about your data?
So read the privacy information. All of them pretty much say we're not going to share unless you tell us to. 23andMe, you can opt in to different kinds of health surveys. But it's opt-in. As far as police potentially using your DNA, GEDmatch is pretty clear. If you're public in GEDmatch, police could use your DNA to run against DNA found at crime scenes. So even if you didn't commit a crime, they could potentially use you to figure out who your first cousin is or your second cousin who did. But with endogamy, they're never going to figure it out anyway. Family Tree DNA, right now, you have to opt out of matching to law enforcement. You have to go into the settings and do it. The default right now is if law enforcement uploads a sample, they need to say, this is a law enforcement sample, and they will match against everybody except for the people who have opted out against it.
Opted out, and that's in which one?
Family Tree DNA. The other ones, both Ancestry and 23andMe, you can't upload, so they can't get these law enforcement samples. Yes.
Slightly off subject, but if people think they might have a Sephardic background, or they might be Jewish and they're Hispanic,
Yep.
which of the
So
DNA?
The only two companies that currently have Sephardic reference populations in their database are MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA. Family Tree DNA has Ashkenazic and Sephardic as two categories. Family Tree DNA has a bunch of different categories. They have Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Iranian Jewish, Iraqi Jewish, Syrian Jewish, a bunch of other ones. The thing to realize is that I've seen MyHeritage to be, I think, overestimating the amount of Sephardic, like by a lot. So I would get it into both and see if they agree. And if they don't, and MyHeritage says you're Sephardic and Family Tree DNA doesn't, I'd question that.
I mean, they need to have larger pools to be.
Right, right. Yeah, and everything's only as good as the reference population. So I think they're still refining them. If both of those companies gives you a nice Sephardic number, I think there's something there. But if MyHeritage does and Family Tree DNA doesn't, you might, but you might not.
My heritage, it narrowed it down to Moroccan Jewish for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's promising, but I don't think they're there yet with the prediction of the non-Ashkenazic Jewish. They're working on it, and I love the fact that they have the different populations, but I don't think they're really good. I have a colleague at work who came in one day and she said, "Lara, what's Sephardic?" I'm like, "What's what?" She says, "Sephardic." And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she showed me. MyHeritage showed she was like 15% Sephardic. And I'm like, "Really?" I was like, "Let's put you on Family Tree DNA, 0%. I helped her work her paper trail back. Her family is Italian. Now, a lot of Sephardim did come to Italy, but we've traced church records back for generations. So 15% Sephardic sounds kind of high for me for her. But she's working getting an aunt to test, which hopefully will help to narrow things down.
Is your confidence in Sephardic groups because the size of sample isn't large?
I think that's what it is. It's just what I've been seeing in practice with people getting large Sephardic numbers on MyHeritage, but not on Family Tree DNA and not on the paper trail. Now, I'm not talking about people who have a tradition or are from New Mexico or have Hispanic heritage. These are people that you wouldn't even suspect are having large percentages of Sephardic. So I think it's a matter of the sample population. I don't know if it's the size. I don't know if it's the fidelity. The problem with the sample population, this is for any population, not just Sephardic. If I'm from a company and you tell me I am 100% British, all of my grandparents were British, all of my great-grandparents, so I will use you as an example of what a British person looks like. But you don't realize that your mother was adopted. And she was really Irish, or she was really German. But I'm using you as an example of what British looks like when you're not British, and so that's going to skew people's results. And so it's a matter of not just the size of the reference population, but if the reference population really is what they say they are. Yeah, so. Yes.
Gilad Japhet.
I'm sorry? Gilad, yeah. Gilad.
We share great-grandparents.
Okay.
Had the same last name from the same town, and we're trying to make the determination if we're related.
Okay.
And he's asking for autosomal DNA.
Yeah.
All right, I've done.
It sounds like you've done Y.
Tree.
And you did Y.
Yeah. And mitochondrial. How do you do autosomal?
You can do it on Family Tree DNA. You have to order what they call their Family Finder test.
Okay.
And they should be able to do it with the sample that they already have. And it's on sale, I think, through today. So order it today.
Well, Gilad is going to send me a kit, send it back to me.
He's MyHeritage. Yeah. So if he sends you a MyHeritage kit, just do that for free. That's better than on sale. All right, anybody else? Yes.
I found some matches, but getting them to continue to talk to me.
Yep.
Is been a challenge. Do you have?
So you don't want to overload them with information. You don't want to give them your life story. Just kind of say, hey, you're a match, and say who you're a match to, right? Because a lot of people contact me and they're like, I match you. And I'm like, who do you match? 90 kids, right? And tell me who. So say,
I actually match you.
Okay. Yeah, so say, here are my surnames, here are my places, I'd love to connect. And short, sweet, send it off. I have people who send me like their life story, and I respond, but a lot of other people will be kind of like their eyes glaze over. And just, if you're on one of the companies that doesn't give you email, with Family Tree DNA, they give you an email address. You're already on email. If you're on Ancestry, I try to get them to email, right? Because some people don't check their messages. So when I message somebody through Ancestry, I message them and I'd say, I'd love to be in contact. Here's my email address. And some of them will initially respond back on email. And I tend to get more responses via email back and forth than via the Ancestry messaging or MyHeritage messaging or 23andMe messaging. So try to get them onto email. Yeah, and I get those too. You get people that just aren't interested. Sometimes if I can figure out kind of how they're related, if you know how they're related, share documents. I'll give them a little bit. I'll be like, oh, I know how you're related. Here's your great-grandmother's marriage record. I'd love to share more with you. And then they're like, that's how you get them to come back to you. So I give them, and I don't give them all at once, right? Because then you don't get a response. You get little, and you reel them in. And if they don't, sometimes they're just people who don't want to contact you. With 23andMe, you get people who just tested for health reasons and they couldn't care less about the ancestry. On Ancestry, part of the way they got their big database is because they are awesome at their commercials. But the commercials are pushing, learn about your heritage, find out, change your lederhosen for your kilt, right? So, and that's all they cared about, and they really don't care. Family tree DNA tends to have a higher success rate simply because they've targeted genealogists. But, it's just a matter of figuring out what the person wants, giving them documents, giving them information, photos, and hoping that they get back to you. And then there's just some people that just aren't interested. Yeah, photos. If you have photos, send them photos and say, I have more. Because otherwise it'd be cool to get the photo.
But I only have the ancestry contacts. He doesn't check his ancestry.
Yeah, but some people have their ancestry set to send them an email with the whole context. So say, and with Ancestry, you can't send a photo, but you could write in the email, I have a photo of your great-grandparents I'd love to share with you. What's your email address?
So obviously having Ancestry membership. If you only could have one, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Jenny, which one do you prefer?
It depends which one has the documents for the specific place that your family's from. I can't give you, the answer is going to be different for everybody else and everyone in here. But regardless, don't forget about Family Search, and Family Search is free. And they have a lot of microfilmed records for Jewish towns that haven't been indexed. And then there's kind of the one-offs. If you have family that lived in the Budapest area, you want to join, I never know how to say it, but it's spelled MACSE, which is basically an acronym for the Hungarian Genealogical Association, because they're indexing a ton of records that are on Family Search, but you can only search them through their website. If you're doing Prague, there's Gen Team that you want to join. So it really is so specific on where your family lived. Most Eastern Europe, most of them are not great on Eastern Europe in general. They just don't have, you're going to have the American stuff. A lot of local libraries, though, have subscriptions to some or all, and your local Family History Center will have subscriptions to all of them. So you can go to the Family History Center and search as well without having to pay.
Yeah. And part of the problem is that you may have different branches of your family where cousins have used different trees. So I have found information on different branches of my family in different places.
Yeah, for sure.
If I only stick to one, I would miss everything else.
Yeah, and you always need to be careful with the trees. The trees are great hints, but a lot of trees are wrong. So before you add anything from their trees to yours, you always want to double check. But sometimes you have people who do have well-documented trees, and those are the people you want to get in contact with because they're the ones who are really into genealogy. And you want to go from there. Jewish Gen is great. But again, it's going to depend on which specific area you're interested in, because sometimes there are these small places, right? Ukraine, Alex Krakovsky's site. A lot of people don't know about it, but you should if you have family from Ukraine. If you're family from Latvia, the Latvian State Archives has microfilmed all of their metrical records, which are their vital records, and their revision lists, like the census records that they have in the archives. They're all available on their website. You need to do a free login, and you can set that up. But so it's totally very dependent on where your family came, sometimes the country, but sometimes even just the district or the town. All right, thank you. I'll stick around if anybody has any other questions. Thank you.
Beautifully presented.
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Very